Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. This is Reading Great Books in the Bathtub, and I'm the master bather. Please pronounce that correctly. And this week we're going to have a bit of a letdown. Last week, as many of you recall, and has been most of the social media has been a buzz about this. But last week we had the 100th episode, and it's going to be hard to live up to that kind of excitement. We had fireworks and dancing girls, and I wore a pink floral pattern scarf to talk about the decadent era, and it's not going to be that good today. So I'm gonna warn you right now. This is part of a series I sort of started. I keep starting series, I don't know why, and the one we're doing this week is kind of yay nay type, or nay yay type episode. And the first one we did was called Kerouac no, Richard Brautigan yes. Personally, I don't like Kerouac, and I love Brautigan. And so we're going to do that sort of again today. And I want to do it with a little caveat, which is, again, I don't normally in the bathtub we don't actually criticize books. We don't look for stuff we don't like. We don't care about books we don't like, because you just don't bring those in the bathtub. But if you love Kerouac, as I said, that one, please feel free to bring him in. In two years, I may do a piece on how much I love Kerouac. This is not about that. It's just sort of a little way of framing stuff. So today's episode is called, and I know I'm going to get a lot of heat on this one, James Ellroy, no. Andrew Vacchs, yes. So that's our stupid gimmicky intro. Now, I wanted to say that I haven't read much Ellroy. I've read some Ellroy. I got about halfway through the Black Dahlia or the Blue Dahlia 20 years ago, and I got bored. And I had to review the Cold 10,000, which I thought was one of the worst books I ever reviewed. I really was bored to death. And so I haven't read much else. And so it's unfair for me to say no, but he just didn't do something for me. And I thought he was kind of interesting when I talk about it in the context of Vacchs, because they both have there's a similar feel to them both, which is a kind of, I hate to say this, they both remind me of Batman. I hate Batman, by the way, and Batman is increasingly I hate. And the Batman universe, which is this Gotham City, which is run by the scum, who are down there in the dirt trying to rape everybody and kill babies and stuff like that. And you got to have a super vigilante, and everything's corrupt. But all this, all these bottom dwellers are out there. It's like a satanic evil filling the city. And I hate that crap. It really is the worst types of the whole metaphysic is appalling. So the Batman stuff never quite works for me, even since I was about 5. I liked it when I was 5. And I think there's an element of that in Ellroy, where you have this kind of super evil, there's all these evil people down there, and you got to have this kind of sort of evil guy who takes care of them and kills them. And he's not, the only difference in my experience between Ellroy and the evil people, the good guys and the bad guys, is the bad guys are beat up women, and the good guys are sort of respectful of women. I think that's what bugs me about Ellroy, and I may be wrong, but I think that's how I feel. This division seems to be kind of phony. There's some similarities in Vacchs, and I've only read him infrequently and out of sequence. He's written this long series of books about called the Burke novels. You never know Burke's first name, or you don't. At least in the books I've read, you never find out Burke's first name. By the way, in England, Burke is about as rude a word as you can say to somebody. You call somebody a Burke. So the first one was Flood, and I hadn't read that. I'd read 2 books out of context, and I liked them. I liked them with reservations, so I'm going to really explain what the reservations are. The first one's called Flood, and what I finally did in the past few weeks is I decided to go back and read them in sequence, because when you read them out of sequence, you're missing things, because there's a lot of references to previous books, and the characters are clearly developing, and we're getting references. We often get little recapitulations of what happened in the previous books, and it's a little annoying when you haven't read them. And I do feel, having read the first 3 in sequence, that they're much better in sequence. You really have to read them in sequence to enjoy them properly. And there's reservations where I can understand you might not enjoy them. Okay, so Flood. There's 3 books I've read, and I read in the past few weeks. The first 3 is Flood, Strega, I guess, and the one I just finished, which is called Blue Belle, which is the best of the 3. I think he hits his stride with Blue Belle when he gets into these Knopf series. They're very easy to get. They're very cheap. So we have a similar picture of the universe, particularly urban universe, where this guy Burke, he basically is sort of a criminal detective. He sometimes is a criminal. He steals from other criminals, and then he's a detective. He helps. His particular interest is helping abused children, which almost sounds like, oh, that's almost too much to deal with. And a child abuse, particularly as a kind of systematic, organized industrial activity, is a underlying theme and drama in the series of books. So you got to be prepared for that, because there are lots of descriptions that are quite difficult. And if it wasn't for the context of the books, because the books are extremely out over the top. They are like Batman to some extent. They're really, all the characters are like superheroes. So you have Flood. I think Flood's superpower is he's super protective. He lives in this house. He's got a gigantic dog named Pansy, and who's trained to basically kill anyone who comes in the house. And he's filled his house with booby traps. His whole life is a series of booby traps. And he's clearly come from some abused background as well. And one of the themes that runs through these books is the idea that the family can be a really deadly place. I think this sort of bugs me a bit about the series, because I don't know anything about what the history of child abuse is, but the notion that it rises out of the family and that the family can be this deadly place for kids is an idea that recurs in these first 3 books. And one of the things that Vacchs' character, Burke, does is he establishes his own family through people he trusts and people who are they can be dishonest, but they have to be professional, and they don't break the law to their buddies, and there's certain lines they don't cross. So for example, there's a guy named Max, who's, I think he's Mongolian. He's this tall, super karate genius who's hiding in the shadows. He's always popping it out of the books, and he's deaf, and he's mute. He can't speak. And there's some very funny passages where Burke and the Mongolian Max, of course, converse with hand gestures. And he's he's just this super whiz-bang guy who can just kill people, and with like a finger or something like that. But anyway, he's always coming out of the shadows and saving everybody's ass. There's another guy named the Mole, who was a really interesting character, who has a junkyard, I don't know, somewhere out in the Bronx or somewhere like that. And it's this huge thing, again, populated by wild dogs, and he's trained. And he's some weird old guy. I think he's obsessed with Israel or something. I don't know if he's Jewish or not, but he's obsessed with Israel. Maybe he's Jewish. And he's a super genius when it comes to mechanical stuff. So whenever Burke needs to break into a house security system, this guy Mole will come out and help him. There's a woman named Michelle who's a transsexual who's trying to earn the money to become a woman completely, and she's like a buddy of his who's kind of always helping him with his girlfriends and stuff, helping his girlfriends look pretty and stuff. And she's also this person you can really trust. And among all these people, there's lots of evil constantly going on. So there's all these kids are being abused, and people are being slaughtered. In I think the second volume of this series, Burke goes out and finds someone who abuses children. And again, they don't just abuse children. They're often involved in conspiracies of abuse, people who take photos of children and sell them on these massive international platforms. And there's secret societies. Secret societies are a big part of the Burke novels. And that Burke has his own little secret society. And we find out about these malevolent systems of abuse and exploitation of children. So again, that's the tough part. But then there's this these are the heroes, the superheroes are going out and saving all these kids in these various situations. So there's the Mole. There's another guy named called the Prof, who people think means the professor, but he means the prophet. And I think he's a black guy who goes around on one of these platforms looking like he has no legs, but he's actually got some sort of trick platform, so he actually has legs. He's a bit of a con man. So they're all sort of con men to some extent. So Flood's power is to have all these secret ways of saving himself. And wherever he goes, there's a scene in when he goes out to get the bad guy in Blue Bell, he just basically turns his whole body into a series of booby traps. And the whole series again starts off with Flood, which is the longest of the book, and they're all basically kind of complicated revenge fantasies. We're having bourbon straight up to talk about. Basically, all of my cocktails have bourbon. It's bourbon with nothing, and that's to talk about the detectives. Okay. So the first one again it's about this woman he falls in love with and who seems to recur throughout the series, who's a super karate girl too, and she's small and beautiful, and she wants to go get this guy who abused her or friends. Usually they're abusing friends, daughters, or children. So the whole gimmick of the book is how do you kind of round these people up? And Burke can find his way through all these secret societies. I mean, he knows the Nazis and he knows this kind of left-wing revolutionary Central American group of guys and men and women. And he can go all through New York and talk to all these people. The writing is really clear. Again, I don't think Ellroy's a great prose writer. That's been my experience. But he's really a good, sharp writer. Like most thriller writers today, I think the books are too long. But at the same time, I think they're much, much leaner and meaner than most of the stuff I've read over the past few years. Let me just read a little passage. This is really random. This is the opening of Blue Bell, which is the best of the series, but I think the best of the first 3 books. And I think they get better after this. And he's talking about looking at a guy who's basically a place where people pass information. And he's a guy who does art on the street. And this is a description of New York, which is nice. His patch of dirt was a border town. Wall Street was expanding its way up from the tip of Manhattan on a collision course with the loft-dwelling yuppies from Soho. Every square inch of space was worth something to somebody, and more to somebody else a few months later. The small factories were all being converted into co-ops. Even the river was disappearing as land greed took builders farther and farther offshore. Battery Park City was spreading its branches into the void left when they tore down the overpass for the West Side Highway. Riverfront joints surrendered to Nouvelle Cuisine bistros. The electronics stores that would sell you what you needed to build your own ham radio or tap your neighbor's phone gave way to sushi bars. Antique shops and storefront-sized art galleries shouldered in next to places that would sell you some vitamins or rent you a videotape. People have always lived down here. The neighborhood used to be a goddamn art colony. It produced more pottery than the whole Navajo nation. The hippies and the artists thought the winos added just the right touch of realism to their lives, but the new occupants are the kind who get pre-orgasmic when you whisper, quote, investment banking, unquote, and they didn't much care for local color. Locksmiths were riding the crest of a growth industry. Almost every page has some really, really nice, sharp, lean, funny. They're usually very funny passages. And when you get into the suspense stuff, it moves really quickly. There's a few other things we're going to talk about. I think I'm going to read through the Vacchs series because I enjoy the Burke books, and I want to keep reading them. And again, the notion there's a lot of interest probably that Vacchs has worked in the law and legal professions and worked in juvenile justice and stuff. So there's some background that there's some realistic background to it. But I honestly believe if you go into these books expecting to learn anything about juvenile justice or the state of child abuse in the world, you won't really. They're really kind of just great over-the-top entertainments with a really dark undercurrent. It's a kind of again, the Batman evil, but at the same time, there's a recognition that in all of this evil is a kind of responsibility of the people who created it, and it's not just this satanic force coming up out of the ground, which is I really do kind of hate in Batman. He also wrote a Batman novel, which I haven't read. So I think that's the last. There was one last thing I was going to say. Yeah. So again, please don't let me bother you. Go enjoy your James Ellroy. I find him a little less interesting. If you don't like James Ellroy, or if you do like James Ellroy, you probably will find Vacchs kind of interesting. Again, James Lee Burke is another good detective writer. But what I want to finally say about the Vacchs books that I've read, And something that's annoyed me over the years is that all the thrillers have gotten really long. And even this book is, I think, too long. The thrillers got really long. There's a lot of reasons for that. But I will say this about Vacchs, which most intrigues me, is the last 50 pages of his books don't suck. The last 50 pages of most thrillers, I think, totally suck. Robert Crace is a wonderful detective writer, and the last 100 pages, 50 to 100 pages of his books just suck. They turn into chase scenes. James Lee Burke, the bad guy, kidnaps a little girl and holds her ransom for 100 pages. They just turn into these really, really predictable piles of crap. I think the first this is one of the best James Lee Burke books. This is the best one he wrote. This is a great thriller, The Neon Rain, by the way. I haven't read it in a long time. But his later books, which I enjoy, first half of the books are great, and then they turn into these kind of programmatic stories. I think Vacchs' books are continually inventing all the way through. And he puts us into situations, and he tries different things, and they may be too long, but even in Blue Bell, you have a kind of a face-off, a standoff, a gunslinger battle between the super powered bad guy who can kill everybody with his karate and everything. And when Burke goes after him as a kind of stumbling, just finding anywhere to get the guy, it doesn't waste too much time. It really moves along quickly. It's filled with surprises all the way up to the very end of the book. And I think he's one of the few thriller writers who I do actually find myself reading all the way through to the end. The Burke series, I don't know how many there were, 18 I want to say, and they just finished about 5-10 years ago. He wrote the last in the series, and he writes other books now. But you got to watch out for that real dark stuff, and it can be very unpleasant. But if you do like kind of dark, well-written thrillers, I strongly recommend the Vacchs books about Burke. Okay. All right, we'll see you next week. We'll try to talk about something that doesn't involve child abuse or me wearing any scarf of any sort. Okay, bye.